Okay, how is that? Can you see my slide now?
Yes.
It's all good? Okay. All right. And so I have about 20 minutes. Is that right? Okay, great.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give you a little background. Enbridge's Line 3 is the largest attempted constructed tar sands pipeline. I'll give you a little bit of background here. If you're not as familiar, the Alberta tar sands, let's move this here real fast, is the largest industrial project on Earth. It's sort of, they call it the bottom of the barrel oil. It's a bitumen, low grade hydrocarbon. It's the extraction of tar sands has been likened to taking honey from a bowl of sugar. It's very laborious. It has to be upgraded. It has exorbitant greenhouse gas emissions when it's being processed and upgraded and extracted and transported. So these pipelines are very problematic. The other part is that the chemical dilutants that are needed to mix the viscous form of bitumen are neurotoxins, including benzene, but also makes the tar sink. So when there are spills, the tar doesn't act like normal oil, it sinks to the bottom of water areas, etc. It's very problematic. This is sort of the big picture of the tar sands and some of the pipelines that have been proposed in the recent years. The Northern Gateway pipeline was canceled, that was defeated. The Trans Mountain pipeline, which is sort of the sister pipeline of Line 3 that is going towards the Pacific Ocean in an attempt to get to deep water ports for export to foreign markets. That has been exponentially slowed down. The Keystone XL, just recently, Biden redacted the presidential permit because it needs a permit to cross national borders from Canada to the US. And then just last week, the permit was revoked from the oil industry, so that is considered a success for Keystone XL. Line 5 goes through the Great Lakes as well, and it was recently shut down by Michigan's governor. And Line 3 was after 7 years of legal litigation from tribal entities and local communities along the route. It was green lighted for construction last November. And so construction has been ongoing since then. About 30 to 40% of the pipe is in the ground so far at this point in time. Yes, and so continuing on from there, hopefully, let me see. I'm hoping this will work. Let me see really fast. Can you see that website? Mapping the Black Snake? Okay, so this is a really neat website.
Yes, we can see everything.
This just shows a really nice visual essay. Canadian tar sands we just went through. The science on climate change is clear. Canadian tar sands, James Hansen, which is the climatologist who was the first to speak to Congress about climate change in '89, has called the tar sands and Keystone XL a carbon bomb that would lead to runaway climate change. We've talked about the transportation that it's used. The Canada and the US is just gridded with these pipelines. What I wanted to show you here, these are the spills that have occurred. So Line 3, the one we're talking about today, is pitched as a replacement project by Enbridge. This is the original Line 3 that goes through here. You can see it going through Bemidji. It's about 50 years old and it's leaking. So Enbridge proposed to, quote, replace it, but actually what they're doing is they're building a new line in this route right here, with a pipe that's 2 to 3 inches wider that can produce more flow of crude and so more equity revenue for Enbridge. So it's not a replacement line, it's a completely new line. Minnesota is one of the worst places you could put this pipe. It's contiguous wetlands. It has over 10,000 lakes in it and countless streams. And this cuts through the heart of those contiguous wetlands. It's 42% of the freshwater sources, including the Mississippi headwaters, which is the largest watershed in the US. Yeah, so it's threatening quite a bit. And this is the map I really wanted to show you. This is the treaty territories that it will traverse. So treaties in the US are handled a bit differently. We have a unique situation where when the US was first being colonized, the British wanted to prove their status to the international community as a sovereign in the United States. So they made a rash of treaties with the indigenous original occupants here. So these are the treaty territories. There's 4 different treaty territories that the pipeline is going to attempt to go through. What we're focusing on in Anishinaabe territory is this 1855 treaty authority, which the federal government in the US Constitution says that treaties are the supreme law of the land in the US Constitution. So they are federally recognized in a trust relationship with indigenous communities. However, state level are not required to honor treaties and acknowledge treaties with indigenous groups. So that's causing a lot of problems with the construction of Line 3. Okay, so let me go back to quickly my slides. Just one sec. The trackpad is going bad. Whoops. Apologies here.
Chelsea, somehow we see just, your speaker screen, not the demonstration screen. I'm not sure whether it was the.
Okay.
Yeah, now it's good.
Okay, now you can see it?
Yeah, it's full screen now.
Okay, sorry about that. Just a sec here. Okay, you can see mapping the black snake now. Okay.
Yes.
So Enbridge, Canadian multinational company, right now they have a tens of thousands of dollar escrow account, which they are subsidizing county police forces here to increase surveillance for water protectors and the indigenous-led resistance to the Line 3 construction. So what you have is a Canadian multinational subsidizing the local police forces. And through this, police forces have procured riot gear and increased their surveillance of water protector sites that I'll get into. I mentioned the existing Line 3 that's over 50 years old now and leaking. So some of the indigenous tribes that have permitted the line have done so because Enbridge sort of gave them an ultimatum that they would take out the leaky old Line 3 and replace it. So they sort of had their hands tied. If they wanted to get this old leaky pipeline off of their lands, they had to permit the new one, if that makes sense. So I've mentioned they call it a replacement project. It's not, it's a new pipe. It's the largest tar sands pipeline attempting to be built ever. So there's a set of multi-tiered dangers happening, going on in indigenous Anishinaabe territories. One are the spills. Pipelines always spill. This is a list of Enbridge crude oil spills in Minnesota alone. Some of the largest in the country historically. There is the issue of missing and murdered indigenous women and girls and two-spirits. So MMIR is what the acronym they use, missing and murdered indigenous relatives. So pipeline construction always increases violence against Indigenous women, girls, and relatives. What happens is man camps form of transient workers that come into these locations and have no local ties to the community. They are very well paid and often have high levels of alcohol and drug use in their communities. And this historically across the board in Canada and the US, and I'm sure elsewhere, has the outcomes of this are always missing and murdered Indigenous relatives, particularly women, girls, and two-spirits. Man camps are illegal in Minnesota, but that hasn't stopped them from forming along the route of Line 3. So that's just one area where Line 3 is not abiding by a state law. So much of the resistance around Line 3 is focused on MMIR, and there are a strategic string of water protector camps, just like Standing Rock and DAPL had one large resistance camp, which was Standing Rock. What they strategically decided to do with Line 3 after learning about Standing Rock was to spread out the water protector camps all along the route. And in order to occupy the proposed route in a more sufficient way. So one of the camps is dedicated to interrupting the human trafficking of of Indigenous relatives that happens with pipeline construction. There's already been arrests in human trafficking with Line 3 construction workers. So that is one huge facet of the resistance movement. The Indigenous-led resistance movement is protecting Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirits. So this is, I argue that it's Line 3's ongoing settler colonization in practice. You can see this map here, that the dark green here are the wild rice lakes, which is called Manoomin. Manoomin is the only traditional native grain in the US continent. And the Anishinaabe origin story, they were told to migrate from the East Coast to where, quote, the food floats on the water. So they traversed from the East Coast across the Great Lakes in their origin story and found the Manoomin, which grows on these waters. And you can see it's sprinkled all throughout this grand ecosystem. And so this pipe has the worst possible route involved as it goes through this contiguous watershed and through these very sensitive rice lakes, this Manoomin. And this is, the Manoomin is a basis for Indigenous lifeways, hunting, fishing, harvesting wild rice. This is all part of subsistence existence for Anishinaabe peoples across this territory. So here's another map of wild rice lakes and rivers in Minnesota. Prior to colonization, these rice lakes extended out to New York State, but have been incrementally encroached upon through colonial policies and laws, and now are across Minnesota, some in Wisconsin, and I believe a little in North Dakota. So the issues that threaten Anishinaabe lifeways are the issues with Manoomin, the fragility of the wild rice. They're sort of a sentinel species. They indicate whether the water is too toxic and out of balance with the region. Sacred and historical cultural sites, many of the permits happened without proper cultural consultations with the tribe. That's one of the appeals in the courts currently. And this sovereignty to steward and live on the land is threatened through Line 3. So one of the avenues of resistance, this is a multi-tiered resistance. It's very sophisticated and it's Indigenous-led. And so allies and settlers who are aligned with Line 3 resistance come into the movement knowing that it is an Indigenous-led movement. And that's very much lessons learned from Standing Rock and how that discourse has then solidified and gone from a national environmental movement and pivoted towards its framing as an Indigenous-led resistance and environmental movement. So that's a really interesting turn in US and Canadian discourse around pipeline resistance, is that it is Indigenous-led and allies come into these spaces knowing that. So one of the threads of resistance is how the White Earth Band of Ojibwe in 2019 gave Manoomin the rights of nature. So in their 1855 Treaty Authority, they amended it to include Manoomin as having rights. This is the first plant to achieve the rights of nature globally. And it's one way rights of nature can work towards upholding treaty rights and working towards environmental protections across the Anishinaabe lands. So I think that's a very interesting approach. So like I said, Line 3 is going through the worst possible route of these wetlands. This is the Mississippi headwaters. It's 42% of fresh water in the US. Currently, Enbridge has no spill plan for Lake Superior, where the line will end and be refined. Lake Superior is 10% of the world's fresh water. And Enbridge just requested billions more gallons of water and were permitted billions just last week, more gallons of water than they initially thought they would need in the process of drilling under certain rivers and placing this pipeline in the ground. And this is happening concomitantly with a severe drought in the region as well. So Enbridge is literally dewatering this watershed to put in a tar sands pipeline while we're experiencing a drought. And that's happening right now. So horizontal directional drilling, the line is proposing to cross 22 river sites using horizontal directional drilling. And that's what's happening on the ground right now, and water protector camps are delaying through their nonviolent direct action, which I'll show. So it involves drilling a hole underneath the river using this pressurized system of mud. And so this is their plan underneath the Mississippi headwaters, where the Mississippi River originates and then contributes to the largest watershed in the US. And then 21 more crossings that they propose to cross in order to get Line 3 across Minnesota and to Superior, Wisconsin at the tip of Lake Superior to be refined, and then connect with Line 5. And so literally right now, water protector camps are calling for allies to come down and hold space because they're moving this heavy machinery towards these drilling sites. And if you visit, the environmental destruction is incredibly heartbreaking. So what's interesting is that many of the environmental regulatory processes, just such as PHMSA, which is the Federal Department for Pipeline Safety, have excluded public commentary features. So you aren't able to oppose these permitting environmental regulatory processes. In the meantime, about 70,000 people submitted testimony across Minnesota, and 94% opposed the pipeline, but the Public Utilities Commission granted it anyway. So this has been a 7-year situation with tribes and allies going through the legal and regulatory spaces to oppose this pipeline with no success to that. So now the indigenous-led resistance to Line 3 is taken to another level, where they're asking for us to put our bodies on the line to delay this construction. And it's been successfully delayed for the last 4 years. So like I said, please remember there's been 7 years of environmental, regulatory, and legal proceedings. So going through all the resistance movement, going through all the correct avenues, and the system has not worked. The system has continued to permit a really poor developmental project in this pipeline. So now indigenous-led resistance is asking for allies to come to the front lines to listen to indigenous leadership and follow their protocols, which all the water protector camps along the route do. And some of the grassroots groups include the GNU Collective, Rise Coalition, Honor the Earth, and these are the bands, White Earth, Red Lake, Mille Lacs, Leech Lake, Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, that have ongoing legal appeals of Line 3. So there's 3 court cases, 1 on the federal level, 2 on the state level. So these are all the levels of resistance I'm pointing out to you. Direct action, nonviolent direct action is what the movement has resorted to now. And in delaying, the game is to then delay the construction of line 3. So there's many different approaches to this. There are walk-ons, soft blockades. Again, this is all Indigenous led. Technical blockades, aerial blockades. And the purpose then is to delay this construction. It's costly to Enbridge, and then it gives the courts a chance to catch up with their legal decisions in the appeals courts. And then we have lockdowns. The most recent one, where there was the treaty people gathering and they occupied a pump station, a Homeland Security Border Patrol helicopter was deployed and roto-washed the site. So they weaponized dust in an attempt to disperse the resistance movement from this specific pumping station, which I think is incredibly interesting, state violence. So this really strategic shift in Indigenous-led governance from protest to prayer happened at Standing Rock and is being continued with line 3. So for example, this was one nonviolent direct action where they put up a wigwam, which is a prayer ceremony space, and were surrounded by people of faith and allies. This is Tara Hauska. She's one of the leaders of the resistance, an Indigenous leader in the Red Lake Band of Chippewa. She's explaining that they're in a space for ceremony while doing nonviolent direct action. And they were surrounded by allies following their leadership. So another strategy then too is the divestment movement, which is also primarily Indigenous led from organizations like Indigenous Environmental Network. They're strategically divesting from the banks who are funding this project. And then they're also taking it to the financial sector as well in a divestment movement. So I hope I've showed you multiple ways that this resistance movement is really sophisticated and working on multiple tiers with through different allies to resist this emergent oil infrastructure. So this was the action that we were a part of. It was a call for Biden to honor the treaties and stop line 3. He does have the ability to revoke the permits for line 3 like he did with Keystone XL. So we're hoping he does the same there. And this is just a typical call for support that went out yesterday. As the heavy drilling machinery gets closer to the river sites, more direct action is being needed in certain areas. Environmental Species Act is one of the things that are used as well. The rusty patch bumblebee is an endangered species along the route. So if it's seen there and there's monitors for that, then that can delay construction as well. So that's another area of strategy that the resistance movement is working on. You asked about allies and partnerships. This is just some of them. Honor the Earth, Indigenous Environmental Network, MN350.org, Sierra Club, Friends of the Mississippi Headwaters. Many folks are doing many approaches to this project. Here's some more allies and political leaders and NGOs. So I'll just end with this, that this is sort of the vision of Honor the Earth for an Indigenous just transition, and the principles of allies that come into these spaces adhere to Indigenous ways of knowing and also these tenets of a just transition. So I hope that gave you sort of a good snapshot of what's happening here on the front lines of line 3 and a little bit of the history and where we're moving towards. One thing to think about is that even if line 3 has been delayed for 4 years successfully, and that has cost Enbridge quite a bit of money and mitigated tar sands expansion during that time. So that is in one way a success of the line 3 resistance on a global scale. Even if the pipe gets put in the ground, we have mitigated the expansion of the tar sands from this pipe by delaying this pipeline for the last 4 years. So that's one way to think about it, even as the pipe is going in the ground today. So I hope that was clear for everyone. Thanks.